"You're leaving." It was not a question. Marcus Barnett stood in the doorway of the barn, one hand braced against the weathered frame, his knuckles white against the gray wood. The lantern behind him cast his shadow long across the hay-strewn floor, and Minnie Pritchard stood in the center of that shadow with her traveling bag in her hand and her jaw set like iron. "My time was through autumn," she said. Her voice did not waver, though everything inside her was shaking apart. That was the agreement. October 31st. Today is October 31st. "Minnie." "Marcus, do not." The bag hit the ground between them, and she pressed both hands flat against her thighs to keep them steady. "Do not say my name like that. Do not make this into something it was not supposed to be." He crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides, and she held her ground even though every nerve in her body screamed at her to step back, to put space between herself and the way he was looking at her, because that look was a trap she had been falling into for 3 months, and she could not afford to fall again. "Tell me it was nothing," he said, low and raw. "Look me in the eye and tell me these past 3 months were nothing to you, and I will saddle your horse myself." The lantern swung in the night wind, blowing through the open barn door. Somewhere out in the dark, a coyote called and was answered. Minnie could smell wood smoke and hay and the particular cold that settles into October nights in the New Mexico territory, sharp and final like a door closing. "What I feel," she said carefully, "has nothing to do with what is possible." "Then tell me what is possible, Minnie, because from where I am standing, everything looks possible." She looked at him then, really looked, the way she had been trying not to look since August, when she had arrived at the Barnett Ranch with nothing but a letter of recommendation from a pastor in Santa Fe and a desperate need for seasonal work. Marcus was 31 years old and had the kind of face that had been made serious by lost, dark eyes that had learned to watch for things going wrong, broad shoulders that had been carrying weight since he was 17. He was not a man who said things he did not mean. That had been the problem from the very beginning. "I have a debt in Denver," she said. "I have a sister who is sick. I have a life that was mid-collapse when I rode in here, and it is still mid-collapse. Nothing has changed." "Everything has changed. Marcus, tell me about the debt," he said. "Tell me about your sister. Tell me all the things you never told me because you were so certain you would be leaving that it did not seem worth the telling." And that was when Minnie Pritchard, who had not cried since her father's funeral 3 years ago in a small Kansas town that no longer felt like home, felt her eyes go dangerously warm. Because he was right. She had kept her secrets packed tight as the traveling bag at her feet, rationing them out the way you ration water in dry country, never giving enough to anyone to make leaving harder. Except that somewhere between the first week of August and the last day of October, she had given Marcus Barnett more of herself than she had intended, and now leaving felt like tearing something. She had arrived in Cielo Verde, New Mexico territory, on a Wednesday in early August of 1884, when the summer heat was still a physical force pressing down on everything in the valley, and the only thing she had been certain of was that she needed money. She needed it quickly, and she would be moving on by November. She had not planned on Marcus Barnett being the sort of man who complicated plans. The town of Cielo Verde sat in a dry valley between 2 ridges of red-brown rock, and it had the particular feeling of a place that was still deciding whether it would survive. There was a main street with a general store, a livery stable, a post office that shared space with a barber shop, a saloon called the Copper Bell that was better behaved than most, a small schoolhouse that was trying its best, and a land office that had been built with ambition and was currently staffed by a man named Hollis Greer who had ambition of a different, more dangerous kind. Minnie had come to Cielo Verde because of a notice tacked to a board in Albuquerque. "Help wanted, Barnett Ranch, seasonal labor, cooking and household management, October through, references required, inquire at land office." She had read it 3 times to make sure she had not misunderstood the duration, and she had not. Through October, just through October, that was exactly what she needed. She had inquired at the land office, and Holly's Greer had looked at her over the top of his spectacles with the particular expression of a man reassessing a situation he had not expected to find interesting, and he had sent word out to the Barnett ranch, and 2 days later Marcus Barnett had ridden into town to meet her. He had shaken her hand. He had asked 3 direct questions about her cooking, her ability to manage a household operation, and her intentions after October, which she had answered with equal directness. He had offered her a wage that was fair, which surprised her. He had told her she would have the small room off the kitchen, her own door that locked, Sundays free, and that the work would be hard because there was a lot of it, which she respected because it was honest. She had accepted. They had ridden out to the ranch in a wagon with enough silence between them to be comfortable rather than strained, which was the first small surprise of what would become a long series of them. The Barnett Ranch was a working cattle operation of moderate size, roughly 2,000 acres of grass and mesa, and a creek that ran reliably except in the driest part of summer. Marcus ran it with 3 permanent hands, a man named Dewey Stroud who was 60 if he was a day, and had opinions about horses that he shared constantly, a younger man called Pete Alvarez, whose family had worked that land for 2 generations before Marcus's father bought it, and who stayed on because Marcus treated him fairly, and a quiet Navajo man named Samuel Runningwaiter who had come to work the ranch 4 years prior, and whom Marcus trusted completely. Minnie would come to understand that trust was the foundation of everything Marcus Barnett built, and that he gave it slowly and kept it permanently. The first week was adjustment. She learned the rhythms of the kitchen, the inventory of the root cellar and smokehouse, the particular preferences of 4 working men who needed fuel more than fine dining. She learned that Marcus rose before sunrise and did not expect conversation until after his first cup of coffee. She learned that the ranch ran on a quiet, efficient dignity that reflected the man who led it. The first real conversation happened in the second week, on a Tuesday evening when the heat had broken for the first time, and the air coming down from the high country had that first whisper of the autumn that would come. Minnie was on the porch shelling beans because it was too warm to do it inside, and Marcus came and sat on the porch steps with a cup of coffee he did not really need, and she knew without being told that he had come to sit with the cooler air and ended up sitting with her. "You from Kansas originally?" he asked, not looking at her, looking out at the last of the light on the western ridge. "Born there," she said. "My father had a small farm outside Wichita. He died 3 years ago." A pause. She watched his profile, the set of his jaw in the fading light. "My father died 4 years ago," he said. "Left me the ranch, left me a lot of debt alongside it which took some time to clear. Is it clear now?" "Mostly." She appreciated mostly. It was an honest word, not a proud one. "You run it well," she said. "The men respect you." He glanced at her then, a quick sideways look as if checking whether she was saying it to flatter him. He seemed to decide she was not. "Pete's family worked this land before it was mine," he said. "That counts for something. Samuel came to me in a bad situation, and I gave him steady work and treated him fairly. Dewey is just old and stubborn and happens to know more about horses than anyone I have ever met. None of it is complicated." "Most people make it complicated," Minnie said. "Most people are afraid of simple," he said, and that was the end of the conversation, and Minnie went back inside and stood at the kitchen window for a long moment trying to understand why that sentence had settled into her chest like it intended to stay. The thing about secrets is that they have weight. Minnie had been carrying hers since she left Kansas in the spring, and the weight had become so familiar that she had stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing a stone in your shoe after long enough. But being around Marcus, who operated with such uncomplicated honesty, started making the weight noticeable again. Her sister Ruth was 24 and living in Denver in a boarding house that cost more than Ruth earned as a seamstress. Ruth had a cough that had started in winter and had not fully left by summer, and the doctor in Denver had used words that Minnie had written down on a scrap of paper and carried in her coat pocket without ever reading again, because reading them made them more real. Ruth needed better care than she was getting, and better care cost money, and money was exactly what Minnie had been assembling piece by careful piece. The debt was different and darker. 3 years ago, after their father died and the farm had to be sold, Minnie had borrowed $200 from a man in Wichita named Clarence Dodd, who presented himself as a businessman, and who was, in fact, a man who lent money at rates that compounded faster than mercy. She had borrowed it to cover the funeral and keep the roof over Ruth's head for those first desperate months, and she had been paying it back ever since. And it had not gotten noticeably smaller because Clarence Dodd charged interest on the interest. And the last letter she had received from his representative had been in July and had contained both a final figure and a final deadline, which was the end of December of this year, 1884. She needed, by her calculations, $140 more. The Barnett Ranch was paying her $22 a month. Through October, she would earn $66, which combined with what she already had would put her just over $110. She needed to find another $30 between November and December. That was why she could not stay. Not because she did not want to. Not because the work was hard or the company was lacking. She needed to move on to another position, another town, another opportunity before Clarence Dodd's deadline arrived, and he made good on the threats his representative had been carefully implying for 2 years. She had not told Marcus any of this because she had not planned to know him long enough for it to matter. September arrived with cooler nights and the first turning of the cottonwoods along the creek. The ranch moved into the controlled urgency of pre-autumn operation, the cattle sorting and the fence inspection, and the winter supply runs that Marcus managed with the same quiet competence he brought to everything. Minnie found herself part of the rhythm of it, waking before sunrise not because she had to, but because she wanted to, walking out to watch the light come up over the eastern ridge with a cup of coffee, and the particular piece of a person who has, temporarily, landed somewhere that feels survivable. She was doing exactly that on a morning in mid-September when Marcus came and stood beside her, which was unusual because he was generally already out working by the time she came outside. "The cottonwoods are going," he said, nodding toward the creek bottom where the first yellow had begun to appear at the edges of the leaves. "Another month and they will be bare," Minnie said. "I like autumn," Marcus said. "Always have. Something about the way the light changes, goes gold instead of white." Minnie looked at the light on the mesa and thought that he was right, that there was a particular quality to September light in this country that she had not seen anywhere else, warm and lateral and generous, as if it was trying to make up for all the harshness of the summer months by spending itself lavishly in going. "It does not last long enough," she said, and she meant the autumn, but she was aware even as she said it that she might mean something else. Marcus was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had a deliberate quality that told her he had been sitting on the words for a while. "You could stay longer than October," he said. "If you wanted." She looked at him. He was watching the creek bottom, not her, giving her the dignity of not being directly observed while she considered it. "There is work through winter," he continued. "Through spring. It would not be charity. The household needs managing, the books need keeping, and I have never been good at either." "I told you October," she said. "You did. I am telling you the offer is open." She did not say yes. She did not say no. She said, "I will think about it," which was the first thing she had said to Marcus Barnett that was not completely honest, because she had no intention of thinking about it. The decision was made by circumstances she had not told him, and thinking about it would only make the leaving harder. But the problem with keeping secrets in close quarters is that they start to leak. Not in obvious ways, not in great dramatic revelations, but in small things. A letter arriving from Denver that she tucked away too quickly. A moment at the supper table when Pete mentioned something about a man from the land office asking around about who worked the ranch, and Minnie went very still for just a half-second before she resumed eating. A Sunday afternoon when Dewey came back from town and said, almost to no one, that there was a man at the Copper Bell claiming to be from Wichita and asking about a woman named Pritchard. That last one hit her like a bucket of cold water. She finished the dishes with steady hands and then went to her room and sat on the edge of the bed and thought very carefully. Clarence Dodd had sent someone. She had expected the letter, not the person, and the person meant the deadline was closer and the patience thinner than she had calculated. His name was Roy Tuck. She found out the next morning when she went to town for supplies and made a careful inquiry at the general store. Roy Tuck, from Wichita, had been in Cielo Verde for 3 days. He had been talking to Hollis Greer at the land office, which was a connection that frightened her because Greer had been the one to send Marcus's job notice and would therefore know exactly where she was working. She was loading the wagon when Marcus appeared behind her, and she knew from the set of his shoulders that he had heard things she had not told him. "There is a man named Roy Tuck," he said, quiet enough that only she could hear, "who has been telling Hollis Greer that a woman named Minnie Pritchard is holding a debt obligation to someone in Wichita, and that he has legal right to collect." She did not turn around. She kept loading the wagon. "That is true," she said. "Minnie," she turned then. He was standing very close and his expression was not angry. It was careful, the way a man looks when he is handling something fragile and is afraid of breaking it. "How much?" he said. "Marcus, no. How much is the debt? That is not your concern. It was never supposed to be your concern. I came here for a season and I will handle my own." Roy Tuck told Greer he has a right to collect by any means that does not cross the law, Marcus said, and the way he said it, flat and weighted, made the air go cold between them. "I know what that phrase means in practice. I am asking how much." She looked at him for a long moment. The sun was high and bright, and the main street of Cielo Verde went about its business around them, horses at hitching posts, a woman sweeping a step, 2 men arguing about a fence line outside the barber shop. Ordinary Wednesday. The ordinary Wednesday in which Minnie Pritchard's carefully constructed wall of private suffering developed its first real crack. $140, she said. By the end of December. Something moved through his expression. Not shock, calculation. "That is manageable," he said. "Marcus, I am not taking money from you. It would not be a gift. I told you the offer stands. Stay through winter, take the wage. At 22 a month you would have it by December without touching what you already have, and what you already have goes to your sister." She stared at him. "I never told you about Ruth." "You talk in your sleep," he said, and then immediately, "I am sorry, that came out wrong. The walls in this house are thin and you have had some troubled nights and I was not trying to. I heard her name. That is all. The walls in this house are thin." The months of proximity in a small house on a working ranch. Of 4 in the morning when nightmares made her restless. Of evenings on the porch and meals at the same table and a growing, terrifying ease with each other. She had been so careful about what she said out loud. She had not been able to guard what she said when sleeping. "Tell me about Ruth," he said. And because the wall was already cracked, and because Roy Tuck was in town, and because Marcus Barnett was looking at her with the patience of a man who had all the time in the world for whatever she needed to say, she told him. She told him about Kansas, about her father, about the farm sold at loss and the borrowed $200 that had never stopped growing. She told him about Ruth's cough and the Denver doctor's careful words. She told him about the 7 different jobs in 3 years, the boarding houses, the constant arithmetic of need, the way she had ridden into Cielo Verde in August with the particular resignation of a person who has been surviving for so long that surviving has become all there is. He listened. He did not interrupt. When she finished, they were both leaning against the wagon and the afternoon had shifted around them, the light going that particular gold that he had told her he loved. "Stay through autumn," she had said, arriving. Now he was asking her to stay beyond it. "Stay through winter," he said. "Handle the debt, take care of your sister. And after that, if you want to leave, I will drive you to the stage myself. And if Roy Tuck does not wait—" "Roy Tuck," said Marcus Barnett. is going to have a conversation with me this afternoon that will clarify the situation." She did not ask him what he intended to say in that conversation, and he did not tell her. What she knew was that Marcus rode into town alone that afternoon and Roy Tuck was on the westbound stage the next morning. And when she asked Marcus what had passed between them, he said only that he had offered to settle the outstanding debt in full against her wages and Tuck had found the arrangement satisfactory. She was furious. She was absolutely furious, and she told him so at supper with Pete and Dewey and Samuel all finding pressing reasons to be elsewhere. And Marcus sat across from her with the quiet steadiness of a man who had made a decision he believed in and was prepared to defend it at length. "That was my debt," she said, "and it is now against your wages, which means it is still yours. I simply moved the creditor. You had no right. Tuck was using methods that were not legal in this territory," Marcus said. "I have a sheriff in this county who I have known for 12 years and who would have agreed with me on that point had I needed to involve him, which I did not, because Tuck found the offer acceptable. What I did was legal. What Dodd was doing was not." She stared at him across the table. "You moved my debt to yourself," she said slowly. "Against your wages, 22 a month. You stay through winter and into spring and the debt is clear. After that you are free to go wherever you need to go. And if I cannot stand being beholden to you for that long." The question came out more raw than she intended. Something shifted in his face, that careful, attentive shift she was beginning to know. "Minnie," he said, "in all the time you have been here, have I ever made you feel beholden?" She thought about it. She thought about Sundays free and the door that locked and 3 direct, honest questions the day they met, and the particular quality of his attention, which was never demanding, never presumptuous, never the kind of attention that makes a woman feel like a debt that needs collecting. "No," she said. "Then give me the same consideration you have given me every other day since August," he said. "I am not doing this to own something. I am doing this because I can and because you needed it, and because that is what you do when you are able." She pressed her lips together. She looked at the table. "This changes things," she said quietly. "It does not have to change anything. It already has." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, it was carefully. "If that is a bad thing," he said, "I am sorry. If it is not, then I am not sorry at all." She went to her room that night and sat with her lamp turned low and wrote a letter to Ruth that said, simply, "There has been a change in my situation. I will explain more in my next letter. Please know that I am taking care of things and that I am well, better than well. I think I may be better than I have been in some time," which surprised her to write but which was, she discovered upon examination, entirely true. October arrived. The cottonwoods went from yellow to gold to the deep burning copper that Marcus had told her he loved, and he was right that the light in October was different from the light in any other month. And Minnie moved through the days of it with the growing, uncomfortable awareness of a woman who has been running for 3 years and has, without quite meaning to, stopped. The thing about stopping is that it gives you time to notice things. She noticed that Marcus brought her coffee on the mornings she was late rising, leaving it on the kitchen table without comment, which was a small act of attention that undid something in her chest every single time. She noticed that he consulted her on ranch decisions that she had no formal expertise in, not because he needed her input but because he valued it, and that was a thing she had not experienced since her father died. She noticed that he laughed, not often, but with his whole self when he did, a sudden warm thing that she found herself manufacturing reasons to produce. She also noticed, because she was paying close attention by this point, that he was lonely. Not obviously, not in any way he would have named or acknowledged, but in the particular way of a self-sufficient person who has organized their life so completely around not needing things that the need itself has gone quiet. The ranch, the work, the small loyal community of his 3 hands, all of it was a good life. It was not a full one. She asked Pete, one afternoon when they were working side by side mending fence along the south pasture, what had happened to Marcus's family. She asked it carefully as a general question about the ranch's history. Pete drove a post and said without looking at her, His mother died when he was 12. His father was a hard man, not a bad one, but hard. Marcus had a woman he was going to marry 7 years ago, name of Clara Whitfield. She left. Not wrong of her, it was hard country and hard winters, and she had family in the East who needed her, but it hit him hard. He drove another post. He has been careful since then, Pete said. Takes care of the land, takes care of us. Does not take much care of himself. We have been hoping something would change that. Minnie drove a post and said nothing and thought too much for the rest of the afternoon. The harvest supper happened on the 3rd Saturday of October, a tradition Marcus had apparently kept for years, inviting the neighboring ranchers and the town's essential people for a supper that Minnie had the primary responsibility for preparing. She had been planning it for 2 weeks and had, she suspected, overdone it by the standards of previous years. But Marcus had looked at her menu with that quiet focus he gave things and said only, "It looks good. All of it." The evening was warm for October, and they ate outside on long tables lit by lanterns, and Cielo Verde's people were genuinely kind, the kind of kindness that grows in small communities where people understand that their survival is tied together. Minnie was introduced over and over as Marcus's housekeeper, and she was aware over and over of the particular way those introductions landed, the slight emphasis, the interested look, the glance between her and Marcus that people made when they thought they were being subtle. She was carrying a pot back to the kitchen when Marcus appeared beside her and took the pot from her hands without asking, and they walked to the kitchen in the kind of side-by-side silence that is only possible between people who have developed a shared grammar of space. "You did well tonight," he said, setting the pot on the stove. "The food did well. I just arranged it." "You arranged it and managed the whole evening and talked to every single person here with a warmth that made them feel like they were the most interesting person in the room." He turned to look at her in the lamplight of the kitchen. "That is not a small thing, Minnie." She looked at him in the warm October kitchen with the sounds of the party still going outside, voices and someone playing a fiddle badly, and the particular laughter of people who have enough to eat and people they like to eat with. And she thought, with a clarity that frightened her, "This is what I have been running past for 3 years." "Marcus," she said. "I know," he said. "I know you are not staying. I know the plan. I just want you to know that the offer is still open, that it will keep being open. That is not fair to you. Let me decide what is fair to me." She looked at him for a long moment. She could hear her own heartbeat, which was embarrassing, and she was certain he could see it in her face. "I am afraid," she said, and the 2 words cost her more than almost anything she had said in 3 years of hard living. "Of what?" he said, very quietly. "Of needing something I might lose." She pressed her hands flat against her sides. "I have lost enough. I have been careful about not acquiring more to lose, and you are—" She stopped, started again. "You are the kind of thing you could lose and not recover from." The silence between them was warm and terrible and exactly as long as it needed to be. "I understand that," Marcus said. "I have been afraid of the exact same thing since August." She laughed then, a small helpless sound, because it was so perfectly, miserably fair that they were both standing in a kitchen in October being afraid of each other. "What do we do with that?" she said. "I think," he said carefully, "we are already doing it. I think we have been doing it. I think I would like to keep doing it if you would let me." She reached out because she needed to, because the moment required it, and touched his hand where it rested on the kitchen table, just her fingers over his knuckles, brief and deliberate. "Let me get through November," she said. "Let me write to Ruth and get her situated, and I need to not be doing this from a place of crisis. I need to not be choosing anything while I am still in the middle of surviving something." "November," he said. "You have it." And so they arrived at October 31st, which is where the story began, with Minnie's bag packed and her jaw set, and Marcus Barnett white-knuckled against the barn door asking her to tell him it was nothing. "November," she said, standing in the lantern light with her bag at her feet. He looked at her carefully. "What?" "I told you I needed November to not be in crisis before I made any choices," she said. But here I am packing a bag on October 31st because the date was the agreement, and I am very good at leaving before things get too real, Marcus. It is possibly my best skill." He was very still. "I am packed because I am afraid," she said, "not because I want to go." "Then do not go. I need to write to Ruth first. I need to have a plan for her care before I can think about—" "Write to Ruth," he said. "Right now, tonight, I will find the paper." She stared at him. "I own this ranch outright as of last year," he said. "I have money in a bank in Santa Fe. Your sister needs a doctor. Denver has doctors. Write the letter and I will arrange what needs arranging, and we do not need to call it anything except one person helping another until you are ready to call it something else. Marcus, you cannot just— I have been waiting for a reason to do something with my life beyond keeping this ranch running," he said, and the rawness in his voice was new, or rather it was the rawness she had been hearing underneath everything for months, finally arriving at the surface without apology. "I do not mean I need saving. I have a good life. I mean it has been a quiet life, and I have been telling myself that quiet is enough, and it was until August, when you rode in here and started leaving coffee cups on every windowsill in the house and arguing with Dewey about horse medicine and making the whole place feel occupied in a way it has not felt in years." She blinked. "I leave coffee cups on windowsills. Every single one in the house. I have no idea why." She had no idea why either. She had not been conscious of it. The unconscious, unkept intimacy of it broke something open in her chest. She picked up her traveling bag. She walked to the barn door. She set the bag down outside on the ground in the dark, as if she were leaving it there for good. Then she turned around and came back inside, and Marcus Barnett, who had been watching her with the expression of a man holding his breath, let it out slowly. "November," she said. "November," he agreed. She wrote to Ruth that night, 3 pages, detailed and honest, saying all the things she had been carefully not saying for months because honesty required stability and stability had been in short supply. She wrote about the debt being cleared. She wrote about the position at the ranch extending. She wrote about Marcus, not the full of it, but enough, writing his name on the page and then reading it back to herself, and thinking that putting it in writing was the most serious thing she had done since she had left Kansas. Ruth's letter came back in 3 weeks. Ruth's letters were always worth the wait. Ruth had the writer's gift that their mother had passed down and Minnie had somehow missed, the ability to make words feel like arms around you. She said she was holding on, that the cough was better in October than September, that the Denver doctor had recommended a drier climate. And then, in the last paragraph, she wrote, "His name is Marcus Barnett, and you wrote it twice in one letter without catching yourself. And I think you know what that means, Minnie. I think you have known for a while." Minnie read that paragraph 4 times and then folded the letter and went to find Marcus, who was in the barn with Samuel doing something involved with saddle leather, and she said, without particular preamble, "My sister's doctor recommends a drier climate. The New Mexico territory is drier than Denver." Marcus looked up from the leather. His expression was measured and entirely too careful. "There are good doctors in Santa Fe," he said, "and in Albuquerque. Both are within a day's ride." "I know. Is that something you are considering?" "I am considering it." "Would she be willing to move?" "Ruth would follow me anywhere," Minnie said. "She always has. I am the one who has been moving without her." Samuel quietly found a reason to be at the other end of the barn. "Minnie," Marcus said, setting down the leather and standing up and crossing the space between them with that particular directness of his, "I want to be clear about something. I am not asking you to stay out of practicality. I'm not asking because of the books or the household management or any of the actual work, though you do all of it better than I could have hoped. I am asking because he stopped, tried again. I am asking because the prospect of you leaving in the spring, or whenever your arrangement with yourself reaches its conclusion, is something I have been unable to stop thinking about in a way that is not remotely comfortable." She looked up at him. "I care about you," he said, simple and plain as everything he said. "I have been trying to be patient about it, and I am still being patient, but I wanted you to know it plainly so that, when you make your decisions about Ruth and Denver and drier climates, you are making them with full information." She stood very still. She thought about Ruth's letter. She thought about 3 years of running and the particular relief of standing still. She thought about coffee cups on windowsills and October light going gold. "I care about you too," she said, and the plainness of it matched his, and she watched something in his face go very quiet and very warm. "That is enough," he said. "For right now, that is entirely enough." November was a revelation. November, which she had been treating as an abstract deadline, arrived and was simply itself. Cold mornings and the bare cottonwood silver in the frost, and the particular smell of a wood stove working against the first real cold of the season. Minnie settled into it with the tentative wonder of someone discovering that the thing they feared was survivable. She and Marcus walked the ranch property together on a Sunday in early November, which was unusual. The whole ranch together rather than divided by work. And Marcus showed her the eastern section that he had been planning to develop, the creek access and the flat ground that would make good additional pasture if cleared correctly. He talked about the ranch the way people talk about things they love and have been tending alone for long enough to be hungry for someone to talk to about them. And Minnie listened and asked questions and offered opinions, some of which were wrong and some of which were, she could see, genuinely useful. And by the time they turned back toward the house in the late afternoon, the conversation had expanded to cover the ranch's future, the town's future, the territory's future, and without quite deciding to. She had started speaking in plural. We could expand the pasture. We might need another hand by spring. Marcus heard every "we" and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. The darkness of the situation arrived in mid-November in the form of a letter from Holly's Greer at the land office. Marcus read it at supper, and his face went carefully neutral in a way that Minnie had come to recognize as his contained version of anger. He passed her the letter without comment. Greer had written to inform Marcus that there had been an inquiry from a land speculation company out of Kansas City regarding the southeastern corner of the Barnett property, specifically the creek access. The company was represented locally by, and Minnie's eyes caught the name and went cold. Clarence Dodd. "He is not here for me," she said slowly, reading the letter again. "No," Marcus said. "He is here for the land. I suspect Roy Tuck's visit was also partly reconnaissance. Dodd moves into new territories by finding leverage first. He used my debt as a way into the area," Minnie said, "and now he is trying to buy creek rights from you." "Trying," Marcus said. "He will not succeed." "He is persistent," Minnie said. "I can tell you from experience that he does not stop when he hears no." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I am going to need to make a formal legal record of the property boundaries and water rights. I should have done it 2 years ago. The territory has been encouraging formal filings and I kept putting it off." "The land office," Minnie said. "Greer handles the filings, yes." A pause. "I do not entirely trust Greer. He was talking to Roy Tuck. He was—" Marcus looked at the letter. "I am going to Santa Fe next week, to the territorial land office directly, bypassing Greer. I would like you to come with me if you are willing, because I would like a second set of eyes on the paperwork." She looked at him across the supper table. A week in Santa Fe, the two of them together with a purpose. "Yes," she said, "I will come." They went to Santa Fe in the second week of November, driving up in the wagon with 2 days' journey each way, and the cold, clear air of the high desert around them. Minnie had not been to Santa Fe, and she was not prepared for its beauty. The ancient adobe buildings and the long history embedded in every wall. The plaza where the old Santa Fe Trail ended, and where the smell of green chili and wood smoke, and the particular altitude of 7,000 feet made everything feel both ancient and alive. Marcus was quiet on the journey in the way that she had learned to appreciate, not uncomfortable silence, but the silence of a man who was content with the company and did not need to fill the air to prove it. She was quiet too, but her quiet was the quiet of a person who has a great deal to think about and is finding the landscape helpful. They filed the water rights and boundary papers at the Territorial Land Office on a Tuesday morning, and Marcus's attorney, a measured man named Caldwell who had offices off the plaza, reviewed everything and pronounced it solid, which was the right word. Marcus Barnett built solid things. On the Tuesday evening, after the legal business was done, Marcus took her to dinner at a restaurant in Santa Fe that was a level of formality she had not encountered since Kansas: white tablecloths and candles, and a menu written in both English and Spanish. She was wearing the best dress she had, a dark blue wool that she had bought with part of her first month's wages, and which, based on the way Marcus looked at her when she came downstairs at the hotel, had been a worthwhile expenditure. "You look very fine," he said, and it was so purely sincere that she almost laughed. "So do you," she said, which was also true. He had made an effort: a dark coat that fit him properly and a clean shirt, and the particular contained formality of a man who does not dress up often, and therefore does it well when he does. Dinner was long and unrushed, and they talked about things they had not talked about before: childhoods, ambitions, the particular specific texture of grief, the way loss reshapes a person not just in the obvious ways but in the small persistent ones. Marcus talked about his mother, which she could tell was rare. She talked about her father and found that 3 years on, the grief had become something she could handle without the weight of it flattening her. "He would have liked you," she said, and surprised herself with it, because she had not known it was true until she said it. Marcus looked at her across the candle-lit table. "My father would not have known what to make of you," he said. He was suspicious of smart women. "My mother was smart and he loved her despite himself for it." He paused. "I think I come from people who do things despite themselves. It seems to be a family pattern." "Is that what this is?" she said. "Despite yourself?" "No," he said. "This is the most deliberate thing I have ever done." She held his gaze across the table. "Candles, Santa Fe, November. I would like to court you properly," he said. "I know the situation has been unusual, and I know you are still finding your footing, and I am not asking for any conclusion right now. But I would like to be honest about my intentions because I have no talent for being dishonest about things that matter." "Properly," she said. "Calls," he said. "Walks, supper that is intended as supper and not just feeding working people. The things that make clear to you and everyone else what I am hoping for." She thought about Ruth's letter. She thought about plural pronouns on a Sunday walk. She thought about the particular terror of wanting something this specifically. "Yes," she said, "I would like that." They drove back to Cielo Verde on Thursday and Friday, and the journey home had a different quality than the journey out. Something settled and named between them that had been unnamed before, and Minnie found herself watching the winter landscape of New Mexico, the bare mesas and the silver grass and the enormous pewter sky, and thinking that it was one of the most beautiful things she had ever seen, and wondering if she had been able to see it because she was no longer looking toward the horizon for an exit. December arrived, and with it cold and earnest. The debt to Clarence Dodd was cleared by December 15th, Marcus presenting her with a receipt from his Santa Fe bank that made her cry in private and thank him in public with a dignity she was proud of. He had handled it with the same quiet matter-of-factness he handled everything, transferring the settled amount to Dodd's representative through legal channels and making it entirely clear that any further harassment would be answered through the territorial courts. Dodd, whose property scheme in Cielo Verde had come to nothing after the formal boundary filing, moved on to other ventures. Roy Tuck was not seen again. Hollis Greer remained at the land office but had a noticeably reduced confidence in his own significance that Minnie privately found satisfying. She wrote to Ruth about the doctor in Santa Fe and enclosed the name and address. Ruth wrote back in 2 weeks from Denver, saying that she had spoken to her landlady about a drier climate and that the landlady had a cousin in Albuquerque, which was closer to Cielo Verde than Santa Fe, and that if things were as they sounded in Minnie's letters, which were becoming increasingly full of a name and increasingly specific about the quality of October light, and how it went gold rather than white. Then perhaps a move to the New Mexico territory was worth considering. Marcus courted her properly through December. He called at reasonable hours with the kind of deliberateness that announced itself clearly to Dewey and Pete and Samuel, all three of whom responded with the particular dignity of men, trying very hard not to show that they were pleased. He brought her small gifts that were carefully chosen, a book of poetry that he had ordered from Albuquerque, because she had mentioned in passing in September that she missed reading, a pair of winter gloves in exactly the right color, a jar of molasses from the general store, because she had said the ranch's molasses was running low, which was a practical gift that somehow moved her more than the poetry, because it meant he had been listening even to the unremarkable things. He took her riding on a Sunday afternoon in mid-December, the two of them on horses in the cold, clear air with the winter light low and golden, and the desert going through its winter palette of silver and rust, and the deep purple of shadow on rock. They rode to the top of the eastern ridge and looked out over the whole valley from there, the ranch below and the town beyond, and the country spreading in every direction under a sky that was very blue and very large. "I want to ask you something," he said. She waited. "If it is too soon, you can say so," he said. "I can wait as long as is needed. That is not a strategy, it is a genuine offer." "Marcus," she said. "I want to know if you can see yourself here," he said. "Not as housekeeper, not as a person passing through on the way to somewhere else. I want to know if, when you look out at this," and he gestured at the valley, the sky, the long reach of the country below them, "you can see yourself in it, permanently." She looked at the valley. She looked at the ranch, which she knew now in intimate detail, the creak of the third step on the porch, the way the kitchen filled with light at 9 in the morning, the sound of the creek in the evening, the particular smell of the grass after rain. She thought about Ruth coming to Albuquerque in the spring. She thought about plural pronouns and coffee cups on windowsills and the look on Marcus's face when she had touched his hand in October, like a man who had not been touched gently in too long. "I can see myself here," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I would like to ask you to marry me," he said. "Not today necessarily, not right this second, but I want you to know that is where I am, so that you are choosing with full information, which seems to be a thing we keep coming back to." She looked at him on his horse in the December light, this serious, steady man who had been, from the first day, more than she had planned for. "Ask me in the spring," she said. "When Ruth is settled and the debt is gone and I have been here long enough that you are certain I will not wake up one morning and run." "I am already certain," he said. "Give me until spring anyway," she said, "as a gift to my own nerves." He smiled, that full, warm thing that she had learned to love producing. "Spring," he said. Christmas came to the Barnett ranch with a quiet joy that Minnie had not expected. She made a feast of it, a full traditional Christmas dinner with what could be procured in Cielo Verde and supplemented from the ranch's own stores. And the table seated 7, Marcus and his 3 hands and Minnie, and the 2 Alvarez cousins who Pete invited, and it was warm and loud and good-natured, and more full of life than the house had been in years. Marcus said, quietly, standing beside her at the kitchen counter after supper while the others played cards at the table. "My mother used to make Christmas like this," he said. "Tell me about her," Minnie said. He did. He talked about his mother for an hour, standing in the kitchen with cold coffee and the warm sound of his men at cards beyond the door, and Minnie listened, and the telling of it seemed to do something for him, seemed to lay something down that he had been carrying quietly, and when he finished he looked at her with an expression that was completely unguarded and simply said, "Thank you for asking. Thank you for telling me," she said. New Year's of 1885 came and went, and January was cold but not brutal, and February brought the first suggestion of eventual spring in the warmer afternoons, and March arrived with Ruth. Ruth Pritchard came by stage from Albuquerque, where she had been for 2 weeks under the care of a doctor who had, in those 2 weeks, done more for her cough than 2 years of Denver medicine. She was thinner than Minnie remembered, and there was a careful quality to her movements that said she was tending herself consciously. But she was Ruth, with her writer's eyes that saw everything and her quick, bright mind, and the particular love she and Minnie had developed. The love of two people who had survived the same difficult things separately and came back together grateful. She met Marcus at supper on her first evening, and Minnie watched her watching him, and Ruth's face, which was as readable as a letter, did not hide what it found. Later, when Marcus had gone out to do the evening check and it was just the sisters in the kitchen, Ruth said, "He looks at you the way Father looked at Mother." Minnie was washing a dish. She kept washing it. "How did Father look at Mother?" she said. "Like the whole room made more sense with her in it," Ruth said. "Like the context of everything improved." Minnie put the dish on the rack. She stood at the sink with her hands wet. "I am going to say yes in the spring," she said. Ruth made a sound that was simultaneously a sob and a laugh. "Oh, good," she said. "I was going to have to start hinting." Spring came to the valley with the particular extravagance of the desert after winter, everything that had been held back releasing at once, the grass going green along the creek, the cottonwoods leafing out in that fresh, uncertain green of new growth, the mornings warming degree by degree until the jacket you left the house in was tied around your waist by midday. The country Minnie had ridden into in the dead summer heat of August was showing her another face now, a softer one, and she found that she loved this face too, loved it the way you love things that reveal themselves gradually, because the gradual revelation means you have been paying attention. Marcus found her at the creek on a Sunday morning in April, which was intentional on his part, she suspected, because she went to the creek on Sunday mornings and he knew it. She was sitting on the bank with her boots off and her feet in the cold, shallow water, which was probably undignified, but which was one of her private joys, the shock of cold water after a winter of cold air. He sat down beside her on the bank. He was quiet for a moment. Then he took something from his shirt pocket and held it out to her, lying in his palm. It was a ring, a simple band of silver with a small turquoise stone, clearly made locally, not a fancy piece but a beautiful one, the stone the particular blue-green of the sky over the mesa at midday. "Spring," he said. She looked at the ring in his palm. She looked at the creek, running with snowmelt, and the cottonwoods and the sky. "Ask me," she said. "Minnie Pritchard," he said, and his voice was the steadiest, most certain thing she had heard in years. "I would like to spend the rest of my life with you on this ranch, under this sky, watching autumn come and trying to keep it as long as possible. I would like to know you were the person I was talking to across supper for the next 40 years. I would like to be the person who helps you carry whatever you are carrying, the way you have been helping me carry things without even knowing it since August. Will you marry me?" She took the ring from his palm. She slipped it onto her finger. The silver was warm from being against his chest. "Yes," she said. "Obviously yes." He laughed, that full, warm laugh, and then he pulled her toward him and kissed her, which was the first time and was, like everything Marcus Barnett did, direct and deliberate and entirely worth the waiting. They were married in June of 1885 in Cielo Verde, at the small church that the town had built the previous year, in a ceremony attended by the whole community and by Ruth, who stood beside Minnie as her witness and cried steadily from the opening words to the final Amen. Samuel Runningwater played a traditional Navajo song on a flute outside afterward, a blessing, which he offered quietly and without ceremony, and which Marcus received with the sincere respect he gave everything Samuel offered. Pete Alvarez gave a speech at the wedding supper that mentioned Marcus's father briefly and kindly, saying that the old man had built something worth keeping, and that Marcus had kept it and improved it, and that having Minnie was the best improvement so far. Dewey Stroud, who had been entirely unable to speak when the moment came, managed to produce a small carved wooden figure of a horse that he pressed into Minnie's hand, and said it was a wedding gift, and walked away very quickly. The first months of marriage were a deepening. She had known Marcus well enough to choose him, and had not anticipated how much more there was to know, how many layers a private person accumulates in 31 years of living, how many mornings it takes to really learn someone. She found that she was happy to keep learning. He found she thought the same. Ruth improved steadily in the dry New Mexico air. By midsummer, she had a position at the Cielo Verde schoolhouse, helping the teacher with the younger students, and she had acquired a small social life that included a correspondence with the Albuquerque doctor's assistant, a detail she mentioned only once to Minnie, and which Minnie filed carefully away. August came, the first anniversary of Minnie's arrival at the ranch, and she stood at the porch railing in the early morning with her coffee, watching the summer light come up over the eastern ridge, the same light that had been harsh and stranger's light when she arrived, and was now entirely familiar and entirely hers. Marcus came out behind her and put his arms around her from behind and rested his chin on the top of her head, which he did sometimes quietly without announcement, and which she had come to love with an intensity that still surprised her. "A year," she said. "1 year," he agreed. "I came for the autumn," she said. "You stayed for something better," he said. She felt against her back the steady warmth of him, the reliable rise and fall of his chest. "I am going to tell you something," she said. "And I need you to not be alarmed." He said nothing, but his arms tightened slightly. "I am going to have a baby," she said. The silence was very full. "Marcus," she said, "say something." He said, "When? January, I think, maybe February." Another silence, but she could feel his heartbeat, and it was not alarmed. "A baby," he said, as if testing the word for structural integrity. "Yes, in January, approximately." He turned her around gently, and she looked up at him in the August light. His face was doing something she had not seen before, something new, a kind of overwhelm that was not sadness, not fear, but the full-body arrival of something very large and very wanted that has finally shown up. "Good," he said. His voice was rough. "That is very good." She put her arms around him, and his arms came around her, and they stood on the porch in the morning light for a long time, the ranch going about its early morning business around them, horses moving in the pasture, a crow calling from the cottonwoods, the creek running, everything continuing as it had always continued while something entirely new had arrived in the middle of it. He was born on the 9th of February, 1886, in a fierce cold snap that sent the temperature down to single digits for 3 days and made the whole valley a world of ice crystals and blue shadow. Ruth was there, and the midwife from Cielo Verde, a capable woman named Mrs. Esperanza Flores, who had delivered half the babies in the territory and had strong opinions about keeping the fire high, and Marcus, who had been told to wait in the sitting room and who had obeyed for approximately 40 minutes before finding reasons to be in the doorway. They named him James, after Minnie's father, with the middle name Thomas after Marcus's mother, who had been born a Thomas before her marriage. James Thomas Barnett arrived in the world loudly and with apparent objections to the cold, and was silenced entirely by the first time his father held him, Marcus sitting in the chair beside the bed with the baby against his chest, and the look on his face that Pete Alvarez, who heard about it from Samuel, said later, was the look of a man who had just received the final piece of something he had not known was incomplete. James was a serious baby who became a serious toddler, looking at the world with his father's dark eyes and his mother's particular attentive quality, and the ranch resized itself around him the way places do around new life, the porch acquiring a small gate, the sitting room acquiring the sturdy clutter of a house with a child in it, Marcus's boots appearing at smaller and smaller distances from the front door as the baby became mobile and required proximity. Minnie ran the ranch books with a thoroughness that Caldwell in Santa Fe said was the best-kept set of accounts he had seen from any operation in the territory. She had, in addition to her management of the household, developed a genuine understanding of the cattle operation and a willingness to share her analysis of it that Marcus received with the same respect he had given everything she offered from the beginning, incorporating her perspective into decisions with a naturalness that Pete observed quietly and found admirable. The ranch grew steadily in 1886 and 1887. Marcus hired 2 additional hands, brought on a part-time bookkeeper to help with the expanding records, and began the pasture development on the eastern section that they had talked about on that November Sunday, when Minnie had first used the word "we" without noticing. The water rights, properly filed and legally solid, proved their worth twice in those 2 years when other ranchers in the valley found their claims challenged by the consolidation interests that kept moving through the territory, testing and probing for weak documentation. Ruth's correspondence with the Albuquerque doctor's assistant, whose name turned out to be Daniel Reyes, reached a conclusion in the spring of 1887 when Daniel came to Cielo Verde to ask Marcus formally, which was touching and old-fashioned, and which Marcus received with quiet seriousness, for permission to court Ruth. Minnie watched this from the kitchen window and had to put down her rolling pin and press her hands to her mouth to contain herself. "You were going to tell him no," she said to Marcus afterward. "I was going to tell him that it was Ruth's decision entirely and that my opinion was irrelevant," Marcus said, "which I did. You terrified him first. I may have asked a few questions. 20 minutes of questions, Marcus. He answered them well." She laughed, and he almost did. Ruth married Daniel Reyes in Cielo Verde in the autumn of 1887, which meant that October arrived that year with a wedding in it. Ruth, in a cream-colored dress, standing in front of the same church where Minnie and Marcus had stood 2 years before, with Minnie as her witness this time and James, at 20 months, as the most interested spectator in the pews. After the wedding ceremony, standing in the churchyard with James on her hip and Marcus beside her, and the October light going exactly as gold as it always did, exactly as it had been doing since the first October morning she had stood on this ranch and thought that it did not last long enough, Minnie thought about the arithmetic of the past 3 years. The debt cleared. Ruth, healthy and married and here. A ranch that was prospering. A house that was full. A husband who looked at her across the supper table every evening with the expression Ruth had identified and which Minnie now recognized from the inside, the sense that the room made more sense this way, that the context of everything was improved. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked, watching her face. "I am thinking that I came here for one autumn," she said, "and that I had no idea what I was arriving for." "Neither did I," he said. "Are you glad?" He took James from her arms because the boy was heavy and was leaning toward his father anyway, and he looked at her over the top of his son's head with those dark, serious eyes. "Minnie," he said, "there has not been a single day since August of 1884 that I have not been glad." She leaned into him, into the warm, solid fact of him, with their boy between them and the wedding party around them and the October sky enormous overhead. The second baby came in the spring of 1888, a daughter this time, whom they named Clara not after the woman who had left. Marcus had been very clear about that, but after his grandmother, whom he had known only briefly and who had been, by all accounts, a woman of considerable force of character. Clara Barnett arrived in April when the cottonwoods were leafing out, and the whole valley was in its spring extravagance, and she was nothing like her brother, not serious in the least, an expressive and demanding baby who grew into an expressive and demanding child, and who had her mother's stubbornness and her father's eyes, and an opinion on every subject she encountered from the moment she was old enough to form opinions. James, at 2 years old, received his sister with the gravity of a senior official considering a new appointment, observed her for 2 weeks, and then declared his ruling by bringing her a small stone he had found in the creek that he apparently considered valuable, placing it carefully beside her, and then returning to his business, which seemed, to Minnie and Marcus, like a full acceptance. Life on the Barnett Ranch in 1888 and 1889 was the life that they built together, which is not the same as the life that happens to you. There was difficulty in it, a bad winter with cattle losses, a summer with less rain than needed, the ongoing slow work of keeping a ranch operation economically viable in a territory that was growing fast and changing fast. There was the work of raising James and Clara, which was its own country of challenge and delight. There was Ruth nearby and Daniel, and they had a baby of their own in the spring of 1889, a boy they named James's middle name Thomas as a coincidence that delighted everyone. There was also, woven through all of it, the particular gift that Minnie had not known she was receiving when she rode into Cielo Verde with a traveling bag and a debt, and a plan to be gone by November. The experience of being fully known by another person. Marcus knew her now the way she knew him, in the deep specific way that comes from years of shared mornings and arguments about cattle decisions and nights when the children were sick, and the ranch needed attention, and everything was difficult at once. And in all of that difficulty and all of that dailiness, the thing she had been afraid to acquire because it could be lost had not been lost, had in fact grown and deepened and ramified through her life in ways she could no longer imagine being without. In the autumn of 1889, their fifth autumn together, Minnie walked out to the eastern pasture on a Sunday morning with 2 cups of coffee, and found Marcus standing at the fence line looking out at the cottonwoods along the creek, which were going through their October performance, the gold arriving and the light going warm and lateral and lavish. She stood beside him. She handed him a cup. He took it without looking away from the cottonwoods. "I used to think autumn was the best season because it was the most beautiful," he said after a while. "And now," she said, "now I think it is the best season because of what it brought me," he said. She looked at the cottonwoods going gold in the morning light. She thought about a woman who had ridden in on a Wednesday in August with a plan to leave in October, and a man who had needed a reason to make the season last, and the way the two of them had turned a temporary arrangement into a permanent one without quite deciding to, through the slow, honest accumulation of trust and time, and a love that had not announced itself dramatically, but had arrived with the reliability of the autumn itself, year after year, dependable and golden, and entirely worth staying for. "The autumn lasted," she said. "It did," Marcus said, "and it keeps coming back." She leaned her head against his shoulder. James's voice floated across the yard from the porch where Ruth was minding the children, high and certain, asserting some principle of toddler justice to Clara, who would certainly object. The creek ran. The cottonwoods glowed. Marcus put his arm around her, and they stood at the fence line in the October morning, and watched their valley do what it had been doing since long before either of them arrived and would be doing long after, going from summer to autumn with all the unhurried extravagance of something that has all the time it needs, the light going warm, the leaves going gold, the air going cool and clean, and full of the smell of a season that knows how to arrive, and when it finds the right reason, how to stay. 3 years later, in the autumn of 1892, the ranch had grown to 3,000 acres with 5 permanent hands and a herd that Dewey Stroud, who was still alive and more opinionated than ever, declared the finest cattle operation between Cielo Verde and Santa Fe. James was 7 and attended the Cielo Verde schoolhouse where, in a satisfying turn of the world's story, his Aunt Ruth now taught full-time. Clara was 4 and had already been asked by Dewey to please stop reorganizing the barn, which she had done twice. Marcus and Minnie sat on the porch on the last evening of October, 1892, as they had begun to do every year, marking the date not as an ending but as an anniversary of a different kind, the particular anniversary of the night in the barn when Minnie had packed her bag and come back and everything had changed direction. 8 years, Marcus said. 8 years, Minnie agreed. The stars over the New Mexico territory were enormous and very bright, the particular brightness of high, dry country where the air has no argument with the light. The ranch was quiet. The children were asleep. Inside, a lamp burned low in the sitting room. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had actually left?" he said. She considered it. It was a real question and deserved a real answer. "I think I would have found my way to Denver eventually," she said. "Gotten some other position, paid off the debt, gotten Ruth settled, I would have managed." "You would have," he said. "You are extremely capable. But I would not have had this," she said. "I would have had managed. This is different from managed." He looked at her. Even after 8 years, even after all the mornings and all the supper tables and all the seasons of daily ordinary intimacy, there was still that quality in his look, the attentive particular quality that said she was being really seen and not just observed. "This is considerably better than managed," he said. She smiled. She put her hand over his on the armrest of the porch chair. His hand turned and held hers. "I am glad I did not leave," she said. "I am profoundly glad you did not leave," he said. They sat on the porch in the October night, with the stars overhead and the creek running below and the cottonwoods bare now, past their gold, standing silver in the dark, and the ranch around them that was entirely theirs, built by the two of them out of the material of a temporary arrangement and a season's worth of careful, honest becoming. The autumn had come back as it always did. It would keep coming back. And they would be here for it, as they had been here for every autumn since the first one, the one that had been supposed to last only until the end of October and had instead lasted, in all the ways that mattered, for the rest of their lives. Inside, a child shifted in sleep and murmured something that resolved into silence. The lamp in the sitting room burned steady. Marcus and Minnie sat together on the porch of the ranch they had built, in the territory they had chosen, under the sky that belonged to both of them, and it was good, and it was whole, and it was entirely, completely, irreversibly enough.